If there is no God, why did you colonize Africa? Ibrahim Traore's powerful voice cut through the silence of the international live broadcast like a knife. French diplomat Richard Laurent stood pale-faced, staring at the cameras. You call religion the opium. What about greed? What is that the opium of? The room fell into shocked silence. Millions of viewers held their breath. 2 weeks later, as Traore sat alone in his palace, his aide entered. Sir, the world is talking about you after that interview. The French foreign minister is requesting an urgent meeting. Traore put aside his files and smiled slightly. Not unexpected, he said calmly. His assistant Marcel continued hesitantly. Sir, this broadcast is breaking records on all social media. Not just in Africa, but in Europe, America, even Asia. Millions have watched it. Traore walked to the window and gazed at the horizon of Ouagadougou. People are hungry for truth, Marcel, as they always have been. Laurent's career seems to be over, said Marcel, showing the news on his tablet. The French government is making statement after statement. We shouldn't underestimate him, said Traore. Richard Laurent is not an ordinary diplomat. He's the chairman of the France-Africa Relations Council and a former intelligence official. He won't back down. Marcel asked with concern, What do you think they want to do? They're probably preparing a counterattack. I'm sure they're gathering all kinds of information about me right now, looking for my weaknesses. Marcel smiled proudly. They won't find any, sir. You've always been an honest and principled leader. Traore turned to look at his assistant. Everyone has weaknesses, Marcel. What matters is knowing these points and turning them into strength. At the same time, in Paris, there was a tense meeting at the French Foreign Ministry building in Quai d'Orsay. Richard Laurent had gathered with the foreign minister and senior advisors. This is unacceptable, shouted Foreign Minister Philippe Moreau. How could you allow such a diplomatic scandal, Laurent? You've caused France to be accused of colonialism in front of the whole world. Laurent tried to maintain his composure. I was set up, Minister. I was invited to that program to discuss Western thought and modernism. No one told me Traore would be there. It doesn't matter, said the minister. You are an experienced diplomat. You should have protected France's interests under any circumstances. Now the whole world sees us as colonial barbarians. Laurent placed a file on the table. I have a counterplan prepared, Minister. We can use Traore's words against him. How? Ibrahim Traore appealed to religious sentiments and gained sympathy even among right-conservative Western viewers. However, we set up a research team and found interesting things. His practices in Burkina Faso contradict his speeches. The minister leaned forward. Go on. While Traore appears to defend conservative religious values, he implements quite secular and sometimes even policies contrary to traditional values in his country. Women's rights, education reform, restrictions on traditional practices. How can we use this? Laurent smiled. We're arranging a second debate, this time on our terms. And this time, we'll corner Traore with his own contradictions. 3 days later, at the Burkina Faso State Palace, Traore was meeting with his special advisor, Dr. Aisha Diallo. What do you think about Laurent's proposal, Doctor? Diallo asked Traore. Dr. Diallo was a Harvard-educated policy expert and one of Traore's most trusted advisors. It's clearly a trap, Mr. President. A debate in Paris, in their home, with their rules. Plus, the moderator is French, too. The conditions won't be equal. Is avoiding an option? Dr. Diallo thought for a moment. Number, if you refuse, it will be perceived as fear, but you can change the conditions. Traore took notes. How? Request a neutral location, an impartial moderator, and live broadcasting is absolutely essential. They could distort your words in an edited program. Makes sense, said Traore. Let's suggest Geneva and request a moderator from the UN. Dr. Diallo expressed another concern. Also, Laurent is probably preparing a file to use against you. They must be examining your policies, your speeches. What could they hope to find? they'll likely try to create a contradiction between your stance on religious issues and your progressive policies. While you defend Africa's traditional values, you also implement Western values such as women's rights, education reform. Traore nodded thoughtfully. This is not a contradiction, Dr. Diallo. The West likes to see certain values as their monopoly, as if justice, equality, progress belong only to them, as if we must follow their path to progress. This is exactly the point you can use, said Dr. Diallo excitedly. Against the West's imposition of a single right path, show that Africa can progress while preserving its own values. A week later, at the United Nations building in Geneva, preparations had been completed for a special program titled Global Values Dialogue. The program would be broadcast live by more than 100 channels worldwide. In the backstage, as Traore was making his final preparations, Richard Laurent could be seen nervously pacing. There was a cold greeting between them. "Are you ready, Mr. Traore?" asked Laurent with forced courtesy. Traore smiled. "I'm always ready for dialogue, Mr. Laurent. Isn't talking what matters?" "Of course," said Laurent. "But today will be different. In our first debate, we missed some details. Today we'll talk more comprehensively." "I can't wait," said Traore calmly. When the program began, the moderator, Ghanaian educator and UN ambassador, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, welcomed the viewers and explained the rules of the debate. Each speaker would make a 5-minute opening statement, followed by a question-and-answer session. Laurent was the first speaker. He gave a carefully prepared presentation supported by visuals. His fundamental argument was the role of scientific thought and secularism in the development of world civilization. At the foundation of Western progress is questioning dogmas and exalting rational thought, he said. For Africa to develop too, it needs to break free from traditional thought patterns and superstitions. Then, showing images of some traditional practices in Burkina Faso, he implied that these were symbols of backwardness. When it was Traore's turn, the room fell silent with curiosity. Traore began to speak, looking only at his notes without using any visual materials. "Mr. Laurent tells us how the West progressed," he said in a calm voice, "but he forgets one thing. This progress was largely achieved by exploiting other societies." The room stirred. Some diplomats shifted uncomfortably. Many Western powers, including France, stole Africa's wealth, used its people as slaves, denigrated its cultures, and while doing all this, they hid behind the excuse of spreading science and civilization. Laurent's face tensed. "But my real question is this. If scientific thought and secularism are such superior values, why did societies that adopted them exploit others so mercilessly? Why did the rational West treat primitive Africa so cruelly?" The room grew even more uncomfortable. Cameras showed close-ups of Laurent's disturbed expression. "Mr. Laurent talks about superstitions," Traore continued. "What about the superstition of colonialism? The superstition of white supremacy? Were these scientific?" Laurent tried to interject, but the moderator waited for Traore's time to expire. "I'm not saying Africa doesn't want progress," Traore concluded. "We do want progress, but progress as we define it, according to our values, in light of our history. We don't have to follow the West's path. We can chart our own course." When the question-and-answer session began, Laurent went on the offensive. "Mr. Traore, in your speech you talked about the importance of religious and traditional values. However, in your own country, you implement quite modern and secular reforms. Women's right to education, banning harmful traditional practices. Isn't this a contradiction?" Traore smiled. "Not at all, Mr. Laurent. Your mistake is seeing justice, equality, progress as values belonging only to the West. You think as if a society can progress only by becoming Western." Laurent frowned. "What do you mean?" "What I mean is this. A woman doesn't need to be Western to receive education. It's not necessary to adopt Christianity or secularism for a just society. Africa has its own values, its own wisdom. We can advance these values while leaving behind harmful practices. This is not a contradiction, it's a synthesis." Laurent tried another strategy. Religious leaders in Burkina Faso criticize some of your policies as westernization. You say you value religious values, but in practice you act differently. Traore calmly replied, Mr. Laurent, you perceive all religion as if it's one thing. There are hundreds of different beliefs in Africa. All of these deserve respect, but none has the right to prevent our progress. Then he turned to the room. Africa's tragedy is the false dilemmas imposed on us by others. Either you'll be traditional and remain backward, or you'll modernize and lose yourselves. This is a lie. We can be a tree with deep roots that still grows towards the sky. Laurent decided to play his final card. Mr. Traore, you once said that God protects Burkina Faso. Isn't that a rather dogmatic statement for a scientific leader? Traore hesitated for a moment, then looked directly into Laurent's eyes. Mr. Laurent, my belief in God may bother you, but I do believe. However, I also know this. Believing or not believing in God doesn't make a person good or bad. What makes a person good is the honesty and fairness in their actions. Then he turned to the entire room. Africa's problem is not religion, it's economic exploitation. A discussion of does God exist or not is meaningless to a hungry child. That child first wants to fill their stomach, and I ask, how moral can a West be that takes Africa's resources, leaves its children hungry, and then says, your problem is your religion? The silence in the studio conveyed the weight of Traore's words. Laurent was struggling to respond. Meanwhile, the moderator began reading questions from viewers. An American student had asked a sharp question directed at Laurent. Mr. Laurent, why do you avoid talking about the damage done by French colonialism in Africa? Isn't this also a kind of superstition? The belief that the West is always right? Laurent stammered. I don't defend colonialism. I'm just saying we should look forward. Traore gently interjected. To look forward, we need to face the past, Mr. Laurent. We can heal not by running from painful truths, but by accepting them. Laurent's response was weak, and the atmosphere in the room had noticeably turned in Traore's favor. At the end of the program, the moderator gave both speakers the floor for closing statements. Laurent, in a more defensive tone, emphasized the importance of scientific progress and avoided delving deeply into questions about colonialism. Traore's closing statement was both brief and powerful. What we've discussed here today is actually the future of humanity. I object to the imposition of a single model of thought, a single path of progress. Africa has the right to find its own way. We neither reject the West nor blindly follow it. We simply defend our right to progress in light of our own history, our own values, and our own vision. And finally, what I want to tell the whole world is this: we can be different, we can believe differently, we can live differently. But without respecting each other, without real dialogue, we cannot progress as humanity. The West and Africa should not be enemies, but partners, equal partners. When the program ended, the room was giving a standing ovation. On social media, the hashtag #TraoreSpeaks had become a worldwide trend. The debate between Traore and Laurent had become more than a simple discussion. It was a symbolic moment of Africa intellectually defending itself against Western perspectives. 2 days later, when Traore returned to Burkina Faso, he was greeted by thousands at the airport. People were dancing, singing, carrying banners that read, "Voice of Africa." When he arrived at his palace, Dr. Diallo was waiting to update him. "The impact of the debate is enormous, Mr. President," said Dr. Diallo excitedly. "Not just in Africa, but in Latin America, Asia, even within Europe. It has created great resonance." "Any news from Laurent?" asked Traore. "The French government has removed him from the chairmanship of the Foreign Relations Council. Apparently they think he has greatly damaged France's image." Traore shook his head sadly. "My intention wasn't to harm a diplomat. I just wanted to present the world with a different perspective." "And you succeeded," said Dr. Diallo. "Laurent dug his own grave. Colonialism is an indefensible position." At that moment, Traore's personal assistant entered. "Mr. President, there's someone calling for you. It's very interesting." "Who?" "Richard Laurent, sir." Traore was surprised. "Put him through." When he took the phone, Laurent's voice sounded tired and defeated. "Mr. Traore, thank you for taking the time for this call." "I'm listening, Mr. Laurent." "I feel I owe you an apology. Our debate, it made me think a lot. Perhaps I could have been wrong on some issues." Traore paused for a moment. "I accept your apology, Mr. Laurent, but I think you owe an apology not to me, but to all of Africa." Laurent sighed. "You might be right. Actually, that's one of my reasons for calling. I'm writing a book, an honest reckoning of France's colonial past in Africa. And if you approve, I'd like to meet with you again, this time for a more constructive dialogue." Traore smiled. "My door is always open, Mr. Laurent. This time, perhaps we can meet not in Paris, but in Ouagadougou?" "With pleasure," said Laurent. "I realized I really need to understand Africa." 3 months later, Richard Laurent did come to Ouagadougou, but this time not as a diplomat, but as a writer and researcher. Traore hosted him at the palace, and they had long conversations for 2 days. When Laurent's book, We Owe Africa, Confessions of a European, was published, it caused great controversy in France. In the book, Laurent acknowledged the West's historical mistakes towards Africa and proposed a new model of relationship based on equal partnership and mutual respect. In Burkina Faso, Traore launched a new reform in education. A new course called African Values and the Modern World was added to the curriculum. In this course, students learned how Africa's traditional wisdom could be applied to modern problems. One day, Dr. Diallo came to Traore's office to discuss the results of this new education program. "The statistics are impressive, Mr. President," said Dr. Diallo. "Both our students' academic success is increasing, and their confidence in their cultural identity is strengthening." Traore smiled with satisfaction. "This is exactly what we wanted, Dr. Diallo, to show that we can progress without losing our roots." "Your debate with Laurent wasn't just a television program," said Dr. Diallo thoughtfully. "It was the beginning of an awakening." Traore looked out the window at the vibrant streets of Ouagadougou. The city was changing. New schools, hospitals were being built. But at the same time, traditional arts and music were also reviving. "Our struggle is not just for Africa, but for all humanity," said Traore. "For a world that is not homogenized, but rich and diverse. A world where everyone can chart their own path, but at the same time, respect others." Dr. Diallo nodded in agreement. "And you took the first step for that world, Mr. President?" "No," said Traore humbly. "The first step was taken by our ancestors, those who fought for independence, preserved our culture, defended our dignity. We are just continuing the journey they began." The sunset over Burkina Faso was shining golden. Traore silently watched this view for a while. In his mind, a bridge was being built between past and future, tradition and innovation, Africa and the world. And on this bridge, humanity could walk together.